Darren Henry Goforth was born on June 19, 1968, to Alan Goforth and Carol Armstrong. By 2015, 47-year-old Darren was married to Kathleen, had 2 children, and was a Harris County Sheriff's deputy. It seemed like he had everything going for him, that is, until tragedy struck in August 2015 and revealed a dark secret in Darren's life. On August 28, 2015, Darren, still in uniform, stopped at a Chevron gas station in Cypress, Texas to fill up his patrol car. That's when a man driving a red Ford Ranger walked up behind him and repeatedly shot him. Here is a clip of the suspect pulling up to the gas station. Afterward, a total of 15 shots were fired, and Darren was pronounced dead at the scene. Thankfully, there was a witness to the murder, someone in Darren's own car. It turns out that he was having an affair and had his mistress with him at the time of his murder. As for the killer, investigators ran the license plate of the Ford Ranger and found it linked back to a man named Shannon Miles. His criminal record dates back to 2005 and includes resisting arrest, trespassing, evading detention, and disorderly conduct with a firearm. In 2012, he was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon after he attacked a man in an Austin homeless shelter over the remote to the TV. He was sent for a mental evaluation, found incompetent, and the charges were dropped. They knew they most likely had their guy. They just needed to find him. After an intense manhunt, officers converged on a home on Crystal Lake at 2:30 in the morning. There, they found Miles's red Ford Ranger and had it towed. While there, they encountered his mother, who told them something very interesting. She told officers, and I quote, "My son is innocent. I was in the house with him, so when that happened, my son was home." Could the police have the wrong guy, or was Miles's mother lying for him? They then brought Miles in for questioning. Meanwhile, officers were searching his home and discovered a .40 caliber gun in his garage. Ballistics tests confirmed it was the same gun that murdered Darren.
You just a cold-blooded murderer that don't care about nobody. I don't know. I can't tell you what happened.
Why did the officer get shot?
I didn't know the dude got shot. You know what I mean? So, this is news to me. You telling me he got shot.
Murderer was in that truck and used that gun.
Well, I'm not saying that's me. I wouldn't have the faintest clue how would all that match up. I'm not the one. Shannon, don't open your mouth anymore if you're going to keep lying to me. How can anybody look at you as anything other than a monster that will kill a police officer?
At that point, they knew his mother lied, and he was subsequently arrested and charged with capital murder. After his arrest, he was transferred to a state mental facility to be evaluated. He was ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia. Meanwhile, the scandal over Darren's mistress would get even worse. It turns out that Deputy Craig Clopton had also been sleeping with her and was fired for it on October 24, 2015. Then, the judge, who was set to preside over the trial, recused herself for undisclosed reasons. Then, on February 10, 2016, Deputy Mark DeLeon was also fired for, guess what, sleeping with the same woman and lying about it to investigators. Then 2 days later, Deputy Jason Goodrich was also fired. Not because he was sleeping with the witness, but because he wanted to and kept pursuing her, even though she wasn't interested. He even sent her inappropriate texts and emails. The biggest issue with all this is that she was the main witness in the murder trial, and this was causing a huge conflict of interest. Regardless of all the drama behind the scandal, Kathleen stuck by Darren's side and called him a good man and a good father. In 2018, Miles was found incompetent to stand trial, but that was eventually overturned. In the end, Miles would never go to trial and instead pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2015, a dress took the internet by storm and caused a mass division among people, with some saying the dress was black and blue, while others thought it was white and gold. I'll give you a hint, the dress was really black and blue. What most people don't know is the family behind the photo. The dress was worn by the mother of Grace Johnston to her wedding to 38-year-old Scotsman Keir Johnston. The photo went so viral, they were even invited on the Ellen DeGeneres show to talk about it. Here's a clip of that episode.
Right. And so we had a bit of a row back and forward like that, and on it went.
So you showed that picture to Keir, right? Is that?
Yeah, and he
Yep.
saw.
And you saw?
Well, I'm a founding member of Team Blue and Black, I'm afraid.
Really?
Yeah.
So then that must have confused you even more.
Needless to say, in the end, it was all fun and games, and the illusion from the dress was pretty cool. The Ellen Show even gave them $10,000 and a free trip to a resort in Grenada. Unfortunately, all the fame around the dress couldn't protect Grace from the nightmare inside her own home. It turns out Keir spent the last decade abusing and controlling Grace, and between April 2019 and March 2022, that abuse escalated. He allegedly assaulted her by pushing her against the wall, shouting and threatening her with a knife. After their marriage, he began monitoring her every movement and even isolated her from friends and family. One night, while at the pub, she refused to leave with him, so he put her in a headlock and dragged her outside. Then, on March 6, 2022, Keir's violence escalated after Grace attended a job interview against his wishes. He pinned her to the ground, sat on top of her, and began strangling her. Thankfully, a witness pulled him off, but Keir ran inside their home before returning moments later with a knife, threatening to finish her off, and began choking her again. Grace called the police and told them, and I quote, "My husband is trying to kill me." He was then arrested and charged with attempted murder for trying to strangle her to death. He initially denied the charges, but on May 9, 2024, he changed his plea to guilty. At the moment, he is set to be sentenced on June 6, 2024. Karen Edna Neve Snider was born in Indiana on July 29, 1948, to parents Russell and June. In late 1966, 18-year-old Karen was living in Crevecoeur, Missouri, and was married to Paul Snider and had a 2-month-old daughter named Paula Marie. At around 11:10 p.m. on November 12, 1966, Paul came home late and shockingly found Karen dead in their upstairs bedroom. Paula was thankfully unharmed and found in her crib. An autopsy revealed that Karen had been stabbed to death in what was described as a severe overkill. In total, she had 125 injuries from the knife. While no fingerprints were found, her dress was collected and would be used years later for DNA testing. They also found blood smears on a broken basement window. A man named James Barbier, who worked with Paul on the railroad and was a pallbearer at Karen's funeral, quickly became a suspect after investigators noticed cuts on his hands during the service. He was arrested, but released after police failed to show enough evidence to charge him. Unfortunately, after that, the case would go unsolved for the next 57 years. In late 2022, investigators reopened the case and spent more than a year examining evidence and tracking down witnesses to re-interview. However, it would be the DNA collected all those years ago that would finally break the case wide open and prove that the now 79-year-old James Barbier was indeed the monster who murdered Karen. On April 25, 2024, he was arrested and charged with her murder. However, due to his age, he wasn't required to remain in jail, but instead was released and forced to give up his passport and firearms due to the Pre-Trial Fairness Act. He is now free to remain at home until the trial. Barbier's next court hearing is scheduled for May 21st and will have already taken place by the time you see this video. As for Paul, he sadly died in 1989 without ever learning who murdered his wife. 17-year-old Omar Bin Imran was one of 9 children living in Jaffa, Algeria, when he suddenly vanished in 1998 on his way to a vocational school. Between 1992 and 2002, the Algerian Civil War, known by citizens of Algeria as the Black Decade, was waging on between the Algerian government and various Islamist rebel groups. Because of that, his parents assumed he was a casualty of the war. After Omar went missing, his family found it odd that his dog roamed around a particular area at the neighbor's home. The neighbor, however, didn't care for the dog on his property and allegedly killed him with poison not long after. Over 26 years later, the truth behind his disappearance would finally be revealed. Sadly, Omar's mother would never learn the truth because she passed away in 2013. In 2024, the case was blown wide open after the neighbor's brother, upset over their inheritance, went on social media and began airing his grievance. Part of that was revealing a secret that he had kept for the last 26 years. The secret was that his brother and neighbor of the Imran family had kidnapped Omar back in 1998. Not only did he kidnap him, but after 26 years, he was still alive and being held captive under a sheep pen in a small space that was locked by a secret trap door. Once the family learned of this, they called the authorities, who came and raided the home. Shockingly, they found Omar, now 45 years old, still alive. Once he was found, the 61-year-old neighbor tried to flee but was quickly restrained and arrested. For the last 26 years, Omar had only been about 650 feet from his family's home. It's been said that he could be one of the world's longest held captives. Unfortunately, it really took a toll on Omar's mental health. The Algerian Ministry of Justice has promised to get him some much-needed psychological care. Interestingly, his captor worked as a civil servant and lived alone, but was seen by others buying enough food for 2 people. Unfortunately, nobody ever put 2 and 2 together. The main question Omar was asked was why he didn't call for help, considering how close he was to his family's home. His response was that his abductor had cast a spell on him. Most likely, it was due to his diminished psychological state. You also have to consider Stockholm Syndrome, where victims begin to trust their captors and in some cases begin to have affectionate feelings for them. Hopefully he can get the help he needs and finally live the life he deserves. Valiree Brianne Jackson was born to Roseann Marie Pleasant and William Bradley Jackson, who went by Brad, on October 6, 1990. Shortly after the birth of Valiree, Roseann and Brad broke up. Brad was then granted full custody, while Roseann was given supervised visitation. Their relationship had been very volatile, and Brad was even arrested once for assault. I'm assuming he got custody because Roseann was allegedly involved in prostitution and drugs. In September of 1992, Roseann called her brother and expressed concern for her own safety and said she was planning to leave Spokane, Washington with 3 of her 4 children. Sadly, she would never get the chance, and 5 days before Valiree's 2nd birthday, she strangely disappeared. After that, Brad told everyone that she abandoned them to live a life on the streets. In 1999, Valiree was a 9-year-old 4th grader at McDonald Elementary School, living with her father, Brad, and his parents in Spokane. Unfortunately, Valiree would end up missing just like her mother. On October 18, 1999, Brad called 911 and said that Valiree was playing out back with her dog before school. He said at some point he heard her leave through the garage door. He said he walked outside at 8:32 a.m. and found her backpack on the front steps, but Valiree was nowhere to be found. He claims he then searched the neighborhood and even knocked on some doors before finally calling 911. Once authorities were involved, a search got underway, and some began to wonder if Roseann had come back and taken her daughter. Police scoured the area but found no signs of Valiree or Roseann. They also questioned over 80 sex offenders, but nothing came of it. At that point, investigators began to suspect that Brad had more to do with Roseann's disappearance than they originally thought. Upon searching his parents' home, they found drops of blood on Valiree's pillow and sheets and Brad's shoes. The blood might have been explained away based on Valiree's history of nosebleeds, but no toilet paper or tissues were found that would typically be used to stop the bleeding. At the time of her disappearance, Brad was dating a woman named Danette Schroeder. She and Valiree didn't get along, and Valiree eventually ended up on the antidepressant Paxil. The two were known for fighting, and Danette felt that she needed counseling. While Brad continued making pleas to the public for the safe return of his daughter, he also let his paranoia get the best of him. He felt that the media and his neighbors were following him, and while he was definitely being followed, it was by the police, not the media and the neighbors. Investigators then came up with an idea to track Brad's movements. They got a search warrant for his 1995 Ford pickup and a car he owned, and unbeknownst to Brad, they installed track devices in both vehicles and then returned them to Brad. The detective on the case then told Brad point blank that he knew he killed his daughter and buried her body in a shallow grave. He said eventually animals would dig her up and they would arrest him. That spooked Brad, and he decided to dig up Valiree and bury her elsewhere. Investigators had 2 locations now to check, not knowing which was which. They ended up at the original burial site and found it empty. Then, on November 15, 1999, they visited the second location at a remote logging site 60 miles from Brad's parents' home. There, they sadly found Valiree's remains. Brad was then arrested and charged with Valiree's murder. Prosecutors believe he murdered Valiree because she didn't get along with Danette, and he wanted to marry her, but they had broken up, so he smothered his daughter to death in her bed. He was said to be obsessed with Danette, and the GPS device even showed him driving by her house multiple times. After being arrested, he called Danette from the jail and proposed to her. She rightfully said no. During Brad's trial, he tried to claim that Valiree died from an overdose of her medication and that he moved her body out of fear of being blamed for her death. He admitted to burying her, but claimed he didn't kill her. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy it, and on October 5, 2000, Brad was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 56 years in prison. Investigators then tried to reinvestigate Roseann's disappearance, but since it had been so long and they didn't have a body, it was almost impossible. Roseann is most likely dead, and Brad is likely the only one who knows where she is. Roseann's brother, John, believes that Brad murdered Roseann and then buried her at a construction site. At the time of her disappearance, Brad was working for Haskins Steel Company and could have easily hidden a body in a building's foundation. Roseann's family is hoping that Brad will one day confess, but as of 2024, Roseann has never been found. Thankfully, Brad will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars.